We're becoming more informed about the rights of tenants. So in this day and age, finding a good home and a good tenancy agreement should be relatively easy. But unfortunately, not every rental is plain sailing.
However, there are many great organisations that have been set up to help the millions of people struggling with bad housing or homelessness. Shelter is one such organisation.
If you're renting privately, it's likely that you will have an assured short-hold tenancy. You should be given a contract when you move into a property. Before you sign it, make sure you make a note of when your tenancy begins, how long it lasts, and how much rent you're agreeing to pay. Signing a contract. If you and your housemates all sign one contract, you will have a joint tenancy. This means you're all responsible for paying the rent. So if one of you moves out or stops paying, you will have to cover their share. Repairs. The landlord is responsible for most repairs in private rented homes. This includes the electrical wiring, plumbing, and the exterior of the property. But it's important to take care of your home. Report problems to your landlord as soon as possible so they can fix them. Moving out. You are committed to paying the rent for the length of your contract, which is usually 6 months to a year. However, you may not need to move out when this fixed term ends. Contact the landlord if you would like to sign a new contract. If you want to leave before the end of your contract, you may be able to negotiate an early exit. Eviction. A fixed-term contract gives you protection. If your landlord wants to evict you during a fixed-term contract, they must convince a judge that they have a good reason to want you out. Shelter provides free housing advice. Visit our website for more information on renting, tenancy deposits and eviction. Call the expert advisors at our free helpline on 0808 800 44 44.
For more information regarding housing issues, be sure to check out Shelter's website.
Now let's get back to Christian Byfield, who's going to answer our viewers' questions. Now, we've asked our viewers to send in their questions for our industry expert, Christian Byfield, to answer. So welcome back, Christian.
Hi guys.
So the first question is from Marty, and he asked, can an agent raise a rent without consulting the landlord?
Yes, there can be rent negotiations, but an agent should never act outside of what a landlord wants or is really knowledgeable of them doing. So, in short, no, an agent can't really act against a landlord's wishes.
And if they did want to change the rent, how much notice would you need to give the tenants?
Usually you'll start this about 2 to 3 months beforehand, because if a tenant's not agreeable to a rent increase and an agreement can't be reached, the landlord or agent's going to have to serve notice, which is at least 2 months. And then start the process about remarketing and looking for a new tenant at their desired new rent level.
And the second question is from Phillimore Jive, who asked, how do I ask my landlord to shorten the lease before I sign it?
The moment you contact a landlord or an agent, make it very clear what period of contract you're seeking for a property, and they'll very quickly know whether that's something they can help you with or not. Eviction doesn't come into it. It's not an eviction notice. A Section 21 is just a very standard piece of paper that sets out a definitive end date of your tenancy agreement. Now, with regards to leaving early, the bottom line is that is the end of your contract. So you might be able to get out early, but it will be entirely at the discretion of the landlord or the agent.
Now finally, Barry asks, when it comes to HMOs, how are the bills worked out?
So HMOs, which is houses in multiple occupancy, usually it's a bit of a sort of hotel setup, and by that I mean that you usually pay a fee and that incorporates everything, including your bills. So that's the typical setup I would expect. The second most common setup would be your sort of prepaid card meter. So as a tenant you have complete control, you know what you're spending for an HMO, but it will depend entirely uniquely on the landlord of the property itself, and the agent handling it.
Something like broadband, would that likely be organised by the individual tenants within a property or with the landlords?
I've known several landlords who set up one connection for the building, all the tenants get the Wi-Fi password and they all have use of it. Or obviously in a house share, then typically you'd have one connection, you guys set that up and you guys are responsible for it. So again, it is unique to that property, that landlord.
If a tenant was sort of refusing to pay or being a bit awkward with the other occupants of the household with bills and things like that, what would happen?
HMOs are slightly different. Usually it's sort of an individual person because it's sort of a room basis. So usually you'll have an individual agreement for your room. There usually won't be multiple parties in.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. We'll be sure to send your queries to our industry experts via the Tenant's Voice on Facebook.
Now I caught up with Eddie Hooker from My Deposits, and he's chatting to us about the importance of settling a deposit and ensuring it's fully protected throughout your tenancy. I know by law, if you pay a deposit to your landlord or letting agency into a government authorised tenancy deposit protection scheme, they have to protect it in one of these schemes. So what exactly does this entail?
Okay, this is a really important piece of legislation which was introduced in 2007 and it all for the benefit of the tenant. So when the tenant pays a deposit to the landlord or letting agency, one of three things must happen. Firstly, the deposit must be protected in an authorised scheme.
Okay.
Secondly, information surrounding that deposit and the tenancy have to be provided to the tenant. So that will have things like the amount of the deposit, which scheme it's protected with, the name and phone number of the landlord, etc. And thirdly, at the end of the tenancy, if there's a problem in the return of the deposit, then the schemes step in and can deal with any disputes which may happen.
Right, okay, so you need to ask for that piece of paper.
Absolutely.
The tenant needs to.
There's about 3.5 million deposits protected in the UK at the moment, and there's quite a lot of awareness around tenancy deposit protection. But some of the research we've done has shown that a lot of tenants don't ask for that information. It's called the prescribed information. So when something goes wrong at the end of the tenancy, they don't know where their deposit's protected, or they don't know who to ring or what to do. So that information is absolutely crucial for the tenant.
Right.
They must ask their landlord or letting agency
When they
for it.
give the deposit,
That's
I guess.
correct, yeah.
So once you come to an end of your tenancy agreement, how long will it usually take for a tenant to get their deposit back?
Well, the law says that you have to wait as a tenant for 10 days after the end of the tenancy. But in that time, you should be in communication with your landlord or letting agent. So ask for the deposit, understand whether there's going to be any deductions. And it's only after 10 days that can you contact one of the schemes for them to intervene. So generally speaking, most tenants will get their money back within a few days. But the important thing is, remember to ask for your deposit back.
Okay, so that's when you guys, My Deposits, will come in
That's correct,
to help
yeah.
tenants. Great. So what about student renters? Is it the same for them?
Well, students are tenants as much as anyone else are. There's certain things which are excluded, so halls of residence, they're not part of the legislation. Lodgers, for example, are not part of it either. But the important thing for students to remember is most students will share. So there'll be one of a number of students all sharing a particular house. And most tenancy agreements for sharers are joint and several. So remember, when you're moving in with your flatmates, you are responsible for the rent, you're responsible for the deposit, you're responsible for repairs and maintenance.
Right.
Even if one of those sharers walks out or refuses to actually pay, you're on the hook.
So make sure you live with people you trust.
You trust that you read the tenancy agreement, that everybody understands the commitment that they're entering into.
Okay. So what about withholding rent? So if a tenant, say, something's happened in the property and the landlord is refusing to do repairs, should a tenant ever withhold their rent?
Look, the advice we give is that you should never withhold any rent. And in fact, tenancy deposit schemes in the main won't deal with a dispute where the tenant has withheld rent, for however fair that situation is. Our advice is, look, if you understand what your obligations are with regards to the tenancy agreement, and the landlord and letting agent understands the obligation, then there should be no reason to withhold rent. And I would always say, talk to your landlord. If there's a problem, say that the property has no heating there, or there's mould building, talk to the landlord, talk to the letting agent. If they don't get anywhere with them, then speak to people like the Citizens Advice Bureau, but keep that rent going, because immediately you stop that rent, you're in breach of that tenancy agreement, and therefore the landlord has a right to throw you out.
Thank you very much, Eddie.
You're welcome, thank you.
Well, what helpful advice, because you could really end up losing out if you don't follow those tips.
Now, before we close, let's hear some comments from tenants we met out on the streets.
It's really difficult in London working in the arts and being able to afford rent, and I'm having to move further and further out of London to be able to get something that's nice that I can afford, and also finding something that's suitable and a healthy living space. Like, I've lived in a place that didn't have a window, I lived somewhere that had big problems like mould and mildew and so on, so you know, it's really important that you find somewhere that is safe and has good living standards and has a good price, and that's really hard to do in London.
I think what we're finding challenging is, obviously, having just moved here, finding it tough to get what comes first, the bank account, and getting all the finances in order prior to getting the house or the apartment, or you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So that's what we're finding challenging at the moment, just lining up all the ducks in a row. So,
London just becoming a playground for rich people nowadays, and other people just being pushed out from level 1 to 2 to 2 to 3 and so on, and nobody was going to live in, no Londoner or any people are going to live in London anymore if you don't have a certain income.
I've only rented one property from one landlord, and for me, I've been quite lucky. He's been quite good. So, you know, if a toilet breaks or something, I can call him and he'll be there the next day, or a plumber will be there. I think I pay too much. I'm definitely paying far too much of his mortgage, but again, I don't really have much control over that. So, yeah, renting in the UK for me so far has been good, 3 years in.
Well, that's all from us here at The Tenant's Voice. Be sure to join us again for more property news and reviews.
And if you have any queries or you'd like to get in touch with any of our industry professionals, be sure to write to us via our Facebook page. Thank you for watching.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.